course that the students have taken. If they did triple GCSE, they will have done a separate biology, chemistry, and physics GCSE. Therefore, they'll have a biology grade. Now you need a grade 6 or above in biology GCSE to get onto the standard level biology course, and a grade 7 or above in biology GCSE to get onto the higher level course. For the students that did double award or combined science, they need to achieve grades of 6 for standard level or 7 for higher level. And also, all students would require a Maths GCSE grade of a 6 or above, because there are mathematical elements of the course, and these are assessed within exam questions and within the individual investigation or the coursework that the students are expected to complete. Standard level students will study the 6 core units that you can see listed in the table. Higher level students will also study these 6 core units, as well as 5 additional higher level units listed in the middle column of the table there. All students will study one option. The higher level students will study some additional subsections of the option. IB Biology is a science. The students are expected to complete a certain number of practical hours. This is 40 hours for SL and 60 hours for HL students. There's 6 required practicals at SL and 7 required practicals at HL, but obviously we'll carry out far more than this during lessons. The reason that there are prescribed practicals are because these are the ones that could be assessed within paper 3. So paper 3 will include exam questions based on one or more of the prescribed practical investigations. So the students have to have completed them. 10 of their practical hours comes from the students' IA, which is their internal investigation or their coursework. And another 10 of the hours comes from the Group 4 project, which is a collaborative project that all IB diploma students complete over a period of 2 to 3 days. The practical work or the individual investigation is assessed by both the teachers internally and then moderated externally. And for this piece of work, the students have to come up with an original question, so an original scientific investigation that interests them and is personally related to them. They then have to collect the data, analyze the data, evaluate the data, fully reference and format the work. And it's worth 20% of the final grade. It's often the thing that can pull students up, pull their grade up when they get their final grades for the IB. These tables here just show the breakdown of the questions and the weighting of each of the papers. So all of the students will sit 3 papers. You can see that for higher level, the papers are slightly longer than for standard level, and the higher level students will do 4.5 hours worth of exams, whereas the standard level students will do 3. The exam papers are worth 80% of the final grade, with the 20% coming from the the individual investigation. Paper 1 for both SL and HL is made up completely of multiple choice questions, and these questions aren't negatively marked. Paper 2 is short answer and extended response questions, and paper 3 is data and practical based questions. So as I said on the previous slide, the students could be assessed on the required practicals during paper 3. There's also short answer questions and a section that contains only questions on the option on paper 3. As you saw on the previous slide, the students will sit 3 exam papers that make up 80% of their grade and submit their individual investigation, which makes up the remaining 20% of their grade. However, they will be assessed internally throughout the 2-year IB course. So they will be assessed at the end of every topic, and these will be cumulative tests. So, for example, if we have studied chapters 1, 2, and 3, at the end of topic 3, they will be tested on everything they've learned so far. They'll have a pre-mock exam in year 12, and they'll have an end of year 12 mock exam. There will then be further mock exams in year 13 that usually take place in December, January time of year 13. The mock exams help for teachers to assess the students' progress, and also they help us to formulate the students' predicted grades that they'll need for university applications. Many of the topics that we cover in IB Biology, the students will recognise from GCSE. However, they'll soon realise that at GCSE we just scrape the surface of what really goes on and what they really need to know. And at IB we go into a lot more detail. So there's a lot, the concepts are a lot more complex, and there's a lot more key terminology for the students to know. Um, at higher level, there are quite a few brand new topics that the students won't have studied before. And the students tend to find this really interesting because they've not studied them in any depth before. So, for example, the kidney isn't studied in a huge amount of depth in GCSE biology or GCSE science, whereas you study it in a lot more depth in HL biology. There's also a lot more detail within the plant biology. They get to look at genetics in far more detail and the reason why we inherit certain things, and how genetics plays a part in our everyday life. So HL, there is a lot more detail within that content. SL, a lot of the content the students will have seen before. However, we just go into a lot more detail. We do look at a lot of exam questions. The exam questions are quite different to the GCSE exam questions, and the way that they're written and the expectations of the students are quite different. So we try and expose them to as many exam questions as possible. And we encourage the students to use exam questions and mark schemes outside of the classroom as well. It's worth remembering that as teachers, all we're given is the specification and the past exam questions. So they're the only resources we've got from actual examiners to allow us to know what the expectations are for the students. There's also a maths requirement for the IB, so the students are expected to have a certain level of a mathematic ability. This is assessed in both the IA and within the exams, and there'll always be mathematical elements within the exam questions. So it's important that the students practice the mathematical elements and ensure that they're aware of what's required of them. We tried to make the IB biology lessons as varied and interesting and exciting as possible. We encourage students to work collaboratively in groups and also independently. We also have a big emphasis on inquiry-based learning, which encourages students to find information and answers themselves, as opposed to the traditional teacher teaching or telling students the content and the answers. We've spoken about the practical lab work in previous slides, so I won't go through that again. I also spoke briefly about exam questions in the previous slides. So again, within lessons, almost every lesson students will be exposed to exam questions, whether it be a few multiple choice questions, a data analysis question, or an extended response question. The skills required to answer the questions at IB are really quite different to the skills at GCSE, so the exam questions are really, really important. Research skills are actually really important, and it often becomes apparent that students don't really know how to successfully research what they're looking for using the internet. So we encourage students to develop their research skills during the IB biology lessons, which will then be transferable and useful later on when they study at university. There's also some flipped learning that goes on, which is where students are required to acquire information outside of lessons, which means that during lessons we can do tasks and activities that then use the information and apply the information, as opposed to learning the information within the lesson. So learning the content is often the easy bit for IB biology, and it's applying the content to the exam questions and to unknown situations, which is difficult. So we use flipped learning in order to address that.